me, I was actually raised in Ripon. I was a church planter for like 13, 14 years in Tracy. And then about 2 years ago, I took the position in Merced, pastor of adult ministries and administration, which pretty much says catch-all, you know, and so that's kept me very busy. The passage we're going to look at today is in James, the book of James, so feel free to look at that. It's towards the back of the Bible, right after Hebrews. And while you're looking at that it was mentioned earlier, today is Reformation Sunday. The idea of that, or the celebration of that, is it's kind of commemorating, you know, the day that in, I think it was 1517, when Martin Luther, you know, tacked his 95 Theses on the wall and explained to the church the things that he had a problem with, and it was the start of what's called the Protestant Reformation. Problem is, after 500 years, however, we kind of whitewash that and think, oh yeah, that must have been interesting, but it becomes this thing like, you know, late in the 90s, I hear the pounding and think, okay, someone there, and tell us Martin just put some on the wall, something to think about, you know, and we kind of like think it was no big deal. But the reality was, it was really a very difficult time, and it kind of sparked a whole raging storm of controversy and conflict that took a lot of lives. An article in history.com stated this: on this day in 1517, the priest and scholar Martin Luther approached the door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg, Germany, and nails a piece of paper to it containing the 95 revolutionary opinions that would begin the Protestant Reformation. In his thesis, Luther condemned the excess and corruption of the Roman Catholic Church, especially the papal practice of asking payment, called indulgences, for the forgiveness of sins. A copy made its way to Rome, and efforts began to convince Luther to change his tune. He refused to keep silent, however, and in 1521, Pope Leo X formally excommunicated Luther from the Catholic Church. That same year, Luther again refused to recant his writings before the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V of Germany, who issued the famous Edict of Worms, declaring Luther an outlaw and a heretic, and giving, mind this, permission for anyone to kill him without consequence. This wasn't just an incident that, you know, kind of affected and Luther responded to this one issue. But in fact, it was a result of years of abuse that was seen going on. Like 16 years ago, there was for lack of a better word, a party that took place at that the Pope hosted that was full of decadence and eroticism, and I mean, I can't even describe the kind of things that they write about what took place that day. And then years later, Luther experienced that himself when he visited Rome. So there was just a total corruption and immorality that was taking place, and this became the kind of the final thing that caused Luther to respond. Well, this Protestant Reformation just kind of spread throughout Europe, and continuing over many years, there are more and more stories that took place about what was happening as a result of this way of enlightening the Scriptures and coming back to what God really called the church to be. In 1533, there's a story about a victor in Paris who gave a message written by then a 24-year-old John Calvin that basically declared war on the Roman Catholic Church. And in doing that, created such outrage that the story goes, both the victor and Calvin having to crawl out of a window with bed sheets and then act like they were vine dressers with hose in their back just to get out safely because everybody's looking at it. And it went on and on. In 1567, Philip, the King of Spain, he unleashed his Spanish, and for those of us who were in school, I can't tell you all about the Spanish Inquisition, that was something he sent them to Holland, and what they had said was that anyone caught reading the Bible or the writings of the reformers was seized, strangled, killed, or burned alive. And history shows over 18,000 people were killed as a result of that Reformation, just in the Holland, and what was going on. So this wasn't something that was lightly looked at, but in fact, it was a huge swelling of a conflict and a storm. But we don't have to be in the Reformation to experience that kind of storm. We can see it every day in our own lives. It could be in the decision you're trying to make, and you just can't figure out where God is, and so you're wrestling with that and wondering, why do I not know what God wants? Why can't I hear Him? Or it could be in some bad news you got about an illness, or maybe a job loss that all of a sudden your future seems uncertain. It could be at school with your friends when you're wrestling, and how kids are in school, where one minute you're a friend, next minute they're talking about you behind your back, or you're facing a decision that you know, maybe because of your faith, but you know is going to cause people to talk about you or maybe alienate you. It could be in the church, ministries that are struggling, members that are fighting. All of it are situations that create and swell up these from small to big storms and conflicts in our life. We're faced with how to react. And while each one of our storms might be different in their own context, Scripture tells us as Christians there's only one way to be able to react. And the passage today kind of touches on it and kind of summarizes what other passages are about. And so James 1 is the passage I want to just address as we're talking about this. And just understand, as James is writing this to the church was, like the Reformation, was under extreme persecution. Christians were being killed, being put in prison. A lot was going on, being alienated from the economy, all of that. So they were really, no doubt, experiencing disappointment and fear and uncertainty. And yet James responds to them in his words in James 1, 2 through 5. This is what I wrote. By the way, I did give out a little insert I brought late. My fault, I missed the deadline for the bulletin. So you got a blank page, but you can grab an insert if you got that. I give you bullets because after all, administration was my role. So I give people bullets and fill in the blanks. So you can grab one, get one, or pick it up later. But anyway, James 1 says this: "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lack wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you." James is describing this response of joy. Think about how do you respond with some of the things that go on in life and say, "Oh man, this is joyful." I think what James is really telling the believers, both then and now, to us, is that James is saying, be storm chasers. Storm chasers is an expression that refers to those who pursue severe weather conditions. It was popular in like 2007. There was a series on TV about storm chasers, or the movie Twister, if you saw that movie. And while it's become something where people kind of go for the thrill of it, the reality is originally the intent was for scientists and researchers who would go into the storm because they knew they could learn so much about the storm if they were there to be able to gather the data. A researcher said they were willing to risk danger because it allows him to observe storms up close and record data he could not get any other way. Well, I think a spiritual storm chaser, the way James is describing here, is an opportunity for our faith to grow best in those storms. That in fact we cannot experience faith growth and relationship growth with Christ and in our relationship with God without being in the storm, without being in those places where those kind of things are revealed. We can't get it anywhere else. And so, in many ways, we experience this joy because we know that this is a moment where I can discover something new and fresh about Christ. I had a couple storms, I have a lot of storms, but I had a couple little storms, skirmishes that came up. I'll give you one of them. Last week we have a food kitchen. We needed a new person to do that food bank. And so I talked to this lady and said, would you do it? She said, yeah, I'll do it. Great. Our missions team oversees it, and this person is in charge. Won't work with her, she said. I don't work with her. If you need, I'm not going to do it. I'm like, what? And so it was kind of caught me off guard because I thought, well, that's kind of severe. But anyway, so we had this discussion. In the middle of this discussion, doing this message, all of a sudden I'm thinking, ooh, this is a storm. This could be good. I might be able to experience something or have a conversation. Maybe she sees something different in the way she's thinking or attitude about this person. Maybe nothing happens immediately, but this is an opportunity where we are in the trenches and discussing relationship stuff that the Bible talks about that changes us and changes her. That's that moment of, it was difficult, but it's a moment of also excitement because I know this is that touch moment of where God is at work in our life. And so what I want to do in these next few minutes is just describe and talk about what the life of a storm chaser is based on what James and other parts of Scripture talk about. So first thing I want to talk about 3 reactions to storms that I think are very common. The first one being flight. Fear, of course, is a motivator of flight when we don't want to face a conflict. So we run from it. Kind of signs of that, we withdraw, or we isolate, or we stuff our feelings, or we shut down. The biblical examples, of course, of that, and James is speaking against that, basically. Those who were fearful about the persecution, who would run from it and hide, and they were negative. And so he's speaking about the joy against that. But some examples might be, for example, Matthew 26, when Jesus is in the garden and he's being arrested. And, he's been talking about this with the disciples. They had a great moment in the evening. We had, Passover together. It was a beautiful time. We go to the garden. And then he gets arrested. And so verse 56 says, then all the disciples deserted him and fled out of fear. There was flight. Later on in the same chapters where Peter knows that Jesus said he's going to disown him. No, I'm not going to do that. And yet, in that moment, he does. And so it says after he realized what he did, he ran off and wept. Modern days, examples are when we face a situation and we just ignore it. Or we just are kind of afraid about conflict, so we minimize it or we deny it even exists. Or maybe we make up excuses and we don't have to face our own issues, and so we just kind of, there's a reason why in reality we're not facing what's really going on. Whatever the reasons, it's contrary to what James is talking about. James is saying, no, we don't run away from these things. We're not afraid of these things. We embrace these moments. We go into this moment because it's a beautiful opportunity. Second one is fight. Also motivated by fear. Fight is a defense mechanism to divert. Again, in that time, there were those who were fighting against what was going on against them. They were fighting against it. And so, again, James is speaking into this about that's not the right motivation. Signs of that, of course, is belittling, criticism, escalation, a fix-it mode. It's kind of my thing. I want to fix it. Or anger. Luke 22, again in the garden. Jesus is in there, and many of you maybe know the story, of course. When the guards come, Peter picks up a sword and cuts off an ear. He's gonna fix this. He's gonna take care of it. And Jesus' response to that, he picks up the ear and fixes it, and he says, no more of this. No more fighting. John 11 is the story of Lazarus. I love that story because it's one where Jesus told Lazarus sick, and what does he do? He spends 4 more days doing ministry. He doesn't come running, So Lazarus dies. Jesus comes. Martha, one of the brothers and friends of Jesus, sees him. He walks up to Jesus. And Martha says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. She's kind of throwing the blame on Jesus. You could have fixed this. You didn't. And then in a passive-aggressive way, says, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. In other words, it's your fault he died, now fix it. Those are reactions where we just look at a problem and we immediately address the problem, we're focused on it. And so in modern day examples, we do. Someone hurts us, and so we react defensively, we say something back. And that's what our politic campaign has been about a lot lately, right? Or react defensively. We attack the other person instead of the problem. Or we just accuse them of something, and then we run, and then we do give up, and then we leave. And we don't ever address what's really going on. And that's not what James is talking about. James is talking about the third reaction, which is it's a reaction of faith. In James 3, he says that it's about a testing of your faith. That's what's going on. It's a testing of your faith. And when you react in faith, you experience, it grows. Your faith goes deeper and it grows greater. And so we can react with joy because we know this is a moment my faith is going to move forward. This is a moment where it's going to go deeper. This is a moment I'm going to grow more in who I am and be able to experience and see God. When I first went into ministry, this was from real estate. I was not, and then I went into ministry. I was kind of a person that would kind of avoid conflict, relationships and other areas. And then in the middle of all of that, God just got a hold of me and he shook up my world and my family's world, my wife's world, and then we just saw him do amazing things. And so we trusted in the situation, stepped out in faith, and the whole first years of ministry we use this attitude of obedience. I'm scared to death to do it, but I'll go. I remember the first time I ever had to give a message, and that was part of what I was learning. I said, okay, you know what, I'm going to say yes before I even think about it, and then I'll deal with the no side afterwards. And so someone was out, actually my couples group at a retreat said, hey, would you give a message when we go camping? Sure. And then I leave it thinking, what am I thinking? But it was that attitude of like, my action is obedience. That, hey, I believe God is in this, so I'm stepping out in faith because somewhere in this scary moment, God's going to do something really good. It's going to teach me, it's going to teach someone else, and I grow from it. So the question here takes that moment in your life is, what is the storm in your life right now? Maybe it could be